when I was trying to figure out the bio for Dan, I couldn't, and then he tried to explain to me what he does, and I still didn't quite get it. But the coolest thing I did take from his bio is that in 2009, he was a marketing assistant for Burton Snowboards. For everything else, he's going to tell you what he does, and he's going to do it talking about everything to do with growth. So please put your hands together for Dan Kriegstein.
Yeah, look, after 20 years, my wife still has absolutely no idea what I do. So let me try to boil it down. I run 2 independent divisions of News Corp. The Growth Distillery you may have heard of, that's our publicly facing research and advisory agency. The Growth Intelligence Centre is a centre that advises government, industry, policymakers, brands on how to get proximate to their customers, what's around the bend. I spend an ocean of time telling brands and businesses what is hiding in plain sight when it comes to their consumers. I appreciate Lisa stitching you up. We are going to go way more with me than we did with Lisa. I'm a fast speaker. I apologise in advance. But we are going to talk about the forces shaping the business that you're in. I'm not a futurist. I don't buy into futurists. If you were to ask a futurist what the future of AI was 3 years ago, ChatGPT would have not been in their vernacular. I'm a presentist. And what I find is 80% of what is on your minds is already playing out under the hood of your consumers. What you've heard today, I mean, from the panel to Lisa's wisdom, is absolutely true. What I'm going to hopefully share with you is the why behind the why behind the why. I'm going to talk to you about stuff that is agnostic of industry. I'm going to talk to you about how to make what you already do more valuable to more Australians. And if I've done my job right, hopefully you're going to see a little bit of yourselves in what I'm talking about. So a quick word on what this isn't. This is not me forecasting anything. Everything I'm going to talk to you about is grounded in what is playing out in the consumer psychology realm, in behavioural science, in developmental psychology, in anthropology right now. What I'm hoping this 30-minute session does, beyond shatter some of your frames of reference, is just help you recalibrate the graphic equalizer in your marketing mentality, in your marketing mix, in the way that you think about your consumers. This is the trust me slide. What I'm going to present to you in 30 minutes is a stitchwork of over 65 programs that have involved not just my incredible research and big data teams, but some of the best global specialist organisations across the world. We also, on every single program that we look at, given that we have to support government and industry, speak to experts. We have had everyone from professors of developmental psychology through to anthropologists, all the way through to someone that specialises in how digital ecosystems are shaping how we form our identity. This is off the back of just shy of 16 terabytes of data, but most importantly, in 12 months, 150,000 plus consumer conversations. We speak to people to draw out these insights. And everything that I'm going to talk to you about, we've released in the last 12 months. All of it is freely available to you. Nothing is behind a paywall. You have access to absolutely everything that I'm going to talk about. And I have to start here. We're going to get into consumer psychology. I'm a strategist by trade. Yes, I'm formally trained as a marketer, but I'm a consumer strategist with a background in psychology and behavioral economics. And this is the most important thing. This is the foundational bedrock of what you're seeing play out with your consumers. The way that you are all interrogating your decisions has fundamentally shifted. And it's shifted due to 1, overarching environmental context, and 3, cultural. We'll go into the 3 in a bit when we talk influence, but the biggest thing shaping your decisioning right now is choice. Are you familiar with System 1, System 2 thinking? The other side to Lisa's book recommendation, the long and the short of it, is thinking fast and slow. System 1 and System 2 thinking, we're wired as humans to use both. System 1 thinking is your reptilian brain. You're driving through the night, you see brake lights go on during the rain, on goes the foot, you've stopped the car before you've even had a chance to really cognitively think about that decision. System 2 thinking is, what's the square root of 247? That face, the face that you're, that's your System 2 brain struggling to get to an answer in the time that you think I've given you to answer that question. Why that's really important is because that shifts not just what we listen to, but how we're using behavioural shortcuts to get to the right decision. And as marketers, the magic trick at the centre of customer centricity is customer proximity. We live in a world where there is more stimulus, where there is more choice. Your choices have more choices within them. Those choices change. You walk out the door with your new iPhone and guess what? It is immediately last year's model. What happens is those choices also get disrupted more quickly. Interestingly, what then happens in this world of choices, our brains are experts at making us unhappy with our decisions. Sylv, I'm going to pick on you. Apologies in advance. But let's say Sylvana walks into Coles, because that's her preferred brand of choice, Lisa, and she's going to buy some shampoo. She wants to buy a shampoo that does two things. Makes her hair silky and smooth and smells pretty good, right? Really simple utilitarian criteria. But she goes in and there's 270 different types of shampoo. By some miraculous, piece of judgment, she gets to the one that she uses. She goes home, it makes her hair silky and smooth, and guess what? It smells great. What her brain does, what your brains do, regardless of age, gender, culture, is play off the 269 hypothetical decisions that she could have made. Maybe one of those other 269 pieces, shampoos, would have made my hair that little bit silkier and that little bit smoother. What that means is that we are inherently unhappier with our decisions in a world of choice. This is not my phenomenon. This is a phenomenon that we have been studying as anthropologists for about 40 years. It's called the paradox of choice. Why this is the most important is because this will shape almost all of your consumers' preference behaviour. How they choose is going to have shifted because we have gone from an age where information was held scarce and privileged, right, by the church, by the government, to one where we have more computing power in the hands of a 10-year-old than JFK did during the Cuban Missile Crisis. You have access to more information as a 5-year-old than what they have categorised as the entire Library of Alexandria. The next thing is this: community trumps audience. You are all in the business of harnessing fandom. Look to sport, look to gaming. We're going to talk about gaming for a bit. It used to be about reach, right? It used to be about getting to the largest scaled audience, when in reality, in an age where everybody's got a platform and we are clamoring to filter our choices fast enough, where do we turn? We look for heuristics. We look for codes of culture. Communities are pre-existing culture, pre-existing codes. And how do I know that which one of those 270 types of shampoo would work for me? Maybe a friend has recommended this because she uses it or he uses it and it works brilliantly. What we see as the power of word of mouth is actually just a fundamental shift in what drives our preference behaviour. And beyond community, right? Finding the community and the best story. If you want to understand the best story of the power of community, look to Pabst Blue Ribbon. It was a US beer brand, not a particularly good one, and they were sort of middle to lower sort of end of the echelon in terms of both brand preference and brand traction. They had this new marketing director that came in and he was trying to figure out how to crack into the US market, particularly in major eastern seaboard cities. And he figured out that in New York, in Philly, in Chicago, there was this community that really held huge cultural sway. The bike messengers. Yes, bike messengers are still a thing in big American cities. And every week there was this thing called King of the City, right? For 1 week you were the king if you won this bike race around New York, until next week you were a nobody and the next person was King of the City. And so he starts rocking up with cases of beer, right? And of course, this standard cynic bike messenger goes, cool mate, we'll take your beer, but thanks and see you later. But he keeps coming back, right? Look, I'm just for you. I love what you're doing. I love that you power the city. Here, have some beer. We want this to be yours. It's for you. Move forward 6 months. These bike messengers who are going into the hipster bars in Lower East Side and meat packers are going up to the bartenders and going, hey, have you guys got Pabst Blue Ribbon? That's our beer, right? Think about the profound traction that you get within a brand, within the ecology of someone's mind when they think that you're theirs, when they're for you, right? Beyond community, let's talk about this. Collaboration, co-creation, and co-ownership are now at the centre of everything that you do. If you don't believe me, look to gaming. I'm not saying that you as brands should become gaming companies, but if you want to understand what the future of good consumer engagement looks like, look to gaming. If you're of my generation, gaming was an amazing pastime, albeit one of the most prevalent. Today, for 2 generations of people, for 20 years at least of your consumer base, gaming is the most powerful cultural force that you will grapple with. Gaming companies' ability to harness their user base to create value, what we called virtuous value creation. We developed a whole brand canvas on this. You can access it freely as well. Has been able to unlock not just growth pathways, but diversification pathways. A great example of this is the Unreal Engine, that is Epic Games' physics engine. For those of you that don't game, the physics engine is, the algorithm that makes the trees sway like this, that the water ripples like this when something falls, that's how it falls. Epic Games' Unreal Engine is now powering the jet propulsion labs used by NASA. The Mandalorian, done by Disney, used the Unreal Engine to replace green screens. To give you an idea of the scale at which this is rewiring people's brains, and we know that it's not just shaping behavior. We've done studies across the world on how gaming is shaping decisioning and the anatomy of children's brains. If you think about it, gaming starts at 2 when you give your kid the iPad and they press the button and it makes a sound, and you build those, compulsion loops within our kids. Gaming is fundamentally rewiring the anatomy of our children's brains. Not just how they work, but there are areas of the brains that are more developed in Gen Z and Gen Alpha than in millennials and Gen X's. Why this is so important for navigating growth for the coming generations of your consumers is because that's what they think good brand engagement looks like. If you can do one little thing that lets them put a little bit of skin in the game, if you can do one little thing that lets them think that they have shaped the path, and we'll talk about agency in a little bit, you have them. We see meaningful increases in willingness to pay, meaningful increases in long-term lifetime value and customer loyalty. And to give you an idea of the scale, I'll pick one game. So the number of years, 68 million years of time have been spent in Minecraft alone. 68 million years of time. That doesn't account for the 1.3 trillion minutes spent in Twitch watching people play the 68 million years of time in Minecraft. And so if there is one area where you should be keeping an eye on to understand how your future consumers are going to want to engage in your brands, look to gaming. Study it ravenously. Understand how they are unlocking millions of hours of dev time from their users, right? They develop these engines through thousands upon thousands upon thousands of iterations, not by their devs that are owned FTEs, but by their user base who want to contribute to the betterment of the value creation that that company creates. The next stop on this very scenic journey, and I apologise in advance, is this. We have spent an ocean of time studying the mental models of health, well-being, essential goods. I really loved what Jane and Olivia said on the last panel. They're absolutely right. We mapped Australia's view of essential goods, and what I can tell you is there are 26 million different types of what essential goods look like. But we saw families that were feeding their kids Maggi noodles every night, not that there's anything wrong with that, so that they could go on their twice-a-year holiday. We saw people giving up their gym membership so that they could get their once-a-month Oroton bag or their once-a-month pair of kicks. We saw parents, sparking joy, really anchoring to the McDonald's fries on the weekend, or so I'm told, with their 2 young children, because that's the moment that matters, right? That serendipitous moment that builds your well-being. If nothing else, please take this from me. You are all in the business of your customers being well, right? I challenge you to find a brand that in some way, shape or form does not have to contribute to how well we believe we are. But what we've seen is a meaningful explosion in our mental model of well-being. We've seen a massive expansion in what wealth looks like. Right off the back of the pandemic, what we've fundamentally done is reappraised what matters most in our life. How much of my life do I want defined by my career? The only people that will remember that you worked late all those nights are your children. And we've finally recognised that. The other really interesting thing that we spent some time codifying was luxury. What are Australia's luxury codes? And there are new models of scarcity. Guess what's not scarce these days? Stuff, right? Stuff isn't scarce. The scarcest resource that your consumers have is the time that they choose to spend engaging with you. I fundamentally subscribe to what Lisa spoke about this morning. Corporate myopia is a wicked beast, right? We think that consumers give as many shit about what we do as we do, right? And as soon as you realise the role that your brand plays, there is a transcendent power in you playing a supporting role in the lives of your consumers. And the companies that get that right are already bearing the fruit of that. But fundamentally, everything that we think we know about our customers is starting to shift. We are walking as brands on quicksand. One of the areas that I think we're fundamentally getting it wrong is this. We are all worshipping at the false altar of youth. We spent almost 2 years codifying youth. What is youthfulness, right? And what I can tell you is a couple of things. The first is Australia's youth are the least youthful generation right now. That's on us, right? We have stolen youthfulness from the youth. They are crippled with anxiety around a future that's not looking so great, right? There's a fundamental belief that the system is stacked against them. If I were to ask you, how many of you have a Gen Z or a youth customer engagement strategy? No one. Yeah, right? I guarantee you that it's about 80% of you. How many of you have a prime of life and retirees engagement strategy, other than your least recommended Medibank, right? We found that boomers and the greatest gen were by far the most youthful. We see this in terms of not just their ability to make time for brand switching and brand experimentation, but also they have discretionary income. We're focused on the wrong end of the spectrum, right? And it's going to take a good 20 years, right? Populations and generations move at glacial pace relative to what boards require of their chiefs and what chiefs require of their marketers. It is going to be an age before Gen Z, even Gen Y, have the discretionary wealth and the time to engage in things that really delight them. On the other end of the spectrum, the largest cohort that is in growth from a consumer perspective are skiers, those that are spending the kids' inheritance, right? But it's not sexy, right, to put someone in their 60s or their 70s in Marcoms. Less than 10% of Marcoms have people over the age of 60, yet they represent over 50% of the discretionary spend, right? This is compounded by the fact that less than 5% of marketing practitioners are over the age of 65, right? So be wary of the biases, not just within ourselves, but within our teams, of worshipping at false altars when it comes to finding prospects and value pools for meaningful growth right now. The next, and I mentioned we looked at Australia's luxury codes, but this is something, we do a lot of work with global maisons, and the biggest thing that we hear from the marketing teams at, the Gucci's, the LVMHs, is that they struggle to convince head office that what works in Milan won't work here. There is a reason for that. Australia has very, very unique cultural codes. We also have a very, very unique national belief structure. We mapped Australia's beliefs. We have 5 universal beliefs. Despite, whether you're a first gen, second gen, or an endemic Australian, we share these 5 beliefs: belief in our place, belief in our land, belief in our people, belief in ourselves, and our belief in others. They're very, very, very unique to the Australian national psyche. When you compound that with very unique visions of success, that sort of recalibration of what the mental model of what wealth looks like. What is a rich life? What that means is that there are greater needs for brand localization, and the brands that have localized well, Lisa's example this morning is absolutely a belter, right? Like, people want to tap into the national psyche. The most successful, diverse, advanced economy globally, right? If I was to look at Western Sydney, a 2 million person subset of Sydney as a city on its own, it would be the most diverse city in the world by a country mile. More than New York, more than London, more than Toronto, more than Montreal. So how do you go about building a brand architecture that caters to the tastes and temperaments to what is about 120 to 150 different cultural backdrops? Well, where you start is recognizing this, and this sounds like a motherhood statement. It is a profound shift in where you start as a brand. The first of the 3 big cultural shifts is a concerning rise in anti-institutionalism and anti-intellectualism. I was talking to Lisa about this morning. The last bastion of this was the medical sector, but COVID threw that out the window when we started to weaponize our medical practitioners, right? We were tuning in to Fauci and he got weaponized in the US. We were tuning in not to Gladys, but to the numbers that were coming from the New South Wales Chief Medical Officer. In an age, particularly the younger you go, the more prevalent this is, the baseline level of cynicism. We are fundamentally, as Australians, distrusting of our institutions, the government, the church, the media. the decisions that they make for us, do they really have my interest at heart? Do they really have my well-being at the front of their priority? What that does is it means that you've got a very different starting point when you introduce yourself as a brand, right? Go back to sort of the Mad Men glory days of marketing, and people were really open, you know. I'm a brand for people like you, come let's have a chat, right? You go up to someone now and go, hey, I'm a brand for people like you. They go, get lost, not interested, right? There is a level of cynicism that fundamentally has to start a conversation that is different to if you were building trust off a base. And so if you think about how do you go about breaking cynicism, how do you convince someone that they're not what they think you are, rather than convincing them of what you are, right? It sounds really nuanced, but it is a meaningful shift, and just integrating that thinking into how you design your engagement strategy has huge differences to where you end up when it comes to the messages that you think resonate with your consumers. Let's get into what I think some of the real magic tricks for growth are right now. And this one, I mean, you should see this in yourself, right? In an ever scarier world, what we are seeing play out across the world is pretty scary. But what happens geopolitically isn't mutually exclusive to what happens within our industries, right? We often we really meaningfully discount and devalue the interconnectedness of our decision making. What happens in the news cycle, what happens at home, impacts what we choose, right? We'll get to a really interesting one when it comes to the impact of technology on brand preference in a bit. But in a world that is scary, giving your consumers agency is going to be your most valuable asset. We are drowning in doubt and anxiety around this lack of control. We see this more in younger audiences than in older, but at a baseline level, we are all more anxious, whether we like to be conscious of it or not. Anything that you can do to convince your consumers that they have made the right decision and it was their decision, it's what's called a psychological moonshot. It's my favorite phrase. There's some great phrases out there. The best example of this is your hairdresser, right? You go to a hairdresser and they finish their job and then they're about to pack up their tools and they go, oh, sorry, 1 second, and they snip that last little bit of hair. What they've done has absolutely nothing to do with the look. What that has done is it's convinced you that you've picked the right hairdresser because your hairdresser took that extra little bit of effort to make sure that there was that one hair that didn't look out of place. It had absolutely nothing to do with the fact that there was a hair out of place. What they have done is given you agency over your decision, right? And what that does is it means that differentiation and distinction is now lying in different places from the core product itself. But before we get to that, I'm going to spend a bit of time on this. This is probably the largest program of work that we've done as the distillery, where we've looked to understand the new rules of influence. How are we being influenced as humans, and how is that changing, and what does that mean in terms of how we show up as brands? How do we compel people to vaccinate? How do you get people to invest more into their superannuation? How do you get people to address the stigmas of mental health, particularly in young women? And there are 4 ingredients of influence: authority, traditional forms of authority, information, the raw material, community, we've spoken about that, and affinity. Affinity is I'm looking to people who look like me, not just cosmetically, but look like me ideologically, look like me in terms of the life I'm looking to live aspirationally. And what I can tell you is that there has been a tectonic shift in what influences us. What has driven that is those first 2, proliferation of choice, information scarcity to information overload. The second is anti-institutionalism and anti-intellectualism. We fundamentally are distrusting. And the third, interestingly, sits at the intersection of the 2. We are being shaped by choice in a fundamentally different way than we thought. If you think about it, we cannot anchor to the codes of culture as we once did. If you go back, think about masculinity, think about country music, right? If you go back 20, 30 years, our culture was pretty codified, right? Move forward 20 years and you can show up like Lil Nas X in a red velour suit, and that's country music. That's also masculine, right? And for the most part, that is an amazing thing, as long as you're not marginalizing anyone. The sting in the tail of moving from culture codes to a codeless culture is that our brains don't have those mental shortcuts, right? If I'm part of community X, or if I'm part of community Y. Historically, they were much more geo-proximate. Now I can have a community of people across the globe. You know, that the pandemic accelerated about 10 years of that. But I don't have these things. I don't have these shortcuts to grapple with and to anchor to. So what do? I look for people who look like me. This is why we see mummy bloggers holding as much weight as an emeritus professor who's been studying toddler sleep for decades and decades and decades. It's why we see travel bloggers holding as much weight as people that have spent their time understanding the amazing power of being part of Qantas's, you know, frequent flyer program. And we see this bifurcation of authority versus relatability and affinity happening across every single sector. From financial advice, right? What would a professor of personal finance know? I'm going to follow John and Jane Doe's Instagram because they've got 2 kids like I've got 2 kids. They seem to be proximate to me. There is an incredible power in signaling your relatability to your consumers now, because power distance is deeply allergic to most consumers right now. And what all of this means is that differentiation and distinction lies beyond your product. This is playing out most interestingly for me, I'm a petrol head, in automotive, right? There are more new entrants in the automotive sector in the last 6 months than there have been in the last 60 odd years. I'm looking at my car over here. At the same time, we have unshackled ourselves from brand stigmas. I'd never buy a Korean car, or I'd never buy a Chinese, or the German cars, head and shoulders above in terms of build quality. All that's gone out the window, right? When you couple this explosion of choice with what I would call the leapfrogging of utility, right? The best example of utility leapfrogging is 8K TV. Wow, amazing technology. Guess what? Your eyes don't see past 4K. Half of us don't see 4K, right? But our need to innovate as companies has leapfrogged the utility that our consumers get from the products that we provide them with. And we've got to sell them something new. We can't go to the board and say, what's your strategy this year? We're going to hold a keel and keep things going, right? We're going to double down on what we did last year. No, it's got to have new news, right? And so more and more, the things that provide a transcendent value are the things that sit around the product, which is why we're seeing huge growth in post-service engagement, huge growth in sort of the book clubs. It's a great, I love the book club idea, right? These things that sit around the product itself have huge value to us, right? Because that's what differentiates. We cannot get to the one choice of shampoo fast enough because it looks like a sea of sameness to the layperson. No one studies our categories as much as we do. They don't know the differences. You know, you go and buy a dryer. Dryer's a great example. We did a whole piece on large appliances in the home. And no one knows the difference between a heat pump dryer, a condenser dryer. I just want something that dries my bloody clothes, right? And then every brand is doing all of them. Same in automotive. You used to have automotive manufacturers that played in the utility vehicle space, and then there was 2 or 3 that had the 7-person people movers. Then you had a couple that had the roadsters, but now all brands play in all places. So have a think about what you wrap around your product, because that's the stuff that's going to separate the wheat from the chaff. Before we get into the world, to AI and digital, because it would be remiss for me not to give you a very unconventional perspective on all of that, simplicity is going to be your most powerful competitive advantage. In an age of choice where your consumers cannot filter fast enough, getting to that choice, simplicity of decision, is going to be your most powerful competitive advantage. And I will leave you with this. As your consumers shift digitally, you risk knowing less about them, not more. Our digital fingerprints are but a keyhole of the behaviour that we like to show online. Staying proximate to your customers is going to be incredibly important. And in a world where generative AI takes that fingerprint further afield, when I can go as a travel consumer and go, hey, ChatGPT, develop me an itinerary to the Maldives for a family of 4 under $10,000, and not only does it generate it for me, but I can then book it. That's the conversation that we as marketers should be having about the impact of generative AI on our consumers and on our industry. Yes, there's efficiencies to be made, but the 80% that's going to shape the way that you do your business and what makes your customers valuable to you is going to be how Gen AI shapes their behaviour, not yours.